'cause he's so smart. Totally inventing the hockey stick chart. Ignoring the snow and the cold in a downward line. Hide the decline.
You know, if you had a law enforcement body that was going out and targeting particular members of our community, you'd think there'd be some protests about it. I know. I speak metaphorically. I'm not talking about the riots in Richmond or Portland. I'm talking about attorneys general going after people that disagree with those in office because it is messing up their ability to hand out taxpayer dollars to their friends' businesses. Chronicled, this isn't sci-fi, in the works of our good friend Chris Horner, best-selling author, Red Hot Lies, the politically incorrect guide to climate change, and of course the liberal war on transparency. Most recently and really notable is the report on the justice system for rent and how Michael Bloomberg was using his NGO to put lawyers in AG's offices to specifically target opponents of climate change. And now with what seems to be a new administration coming in, a great op-ed in the Washington Times, Biden-Harris AG cannot be political rent-a-cop. Chris, Happy New Year. Welcome back. How are you doing this morning, sir?
Happy New Year to you. Thank you. And fantastic.
You are sort of our American version of Václav Klaus as we sit here trying to, break our blue planet out of our green shackles. We just have to keep calling this stuff out for what it is. What is the likelihood this Biden-Harris AG, becomes like all these attorneys general offices bought and paid for with Bloomberg NGO money?
I'm right that the odds are fairly high, and that's obviously not a good thing, and there are fairly good reasons for believing they're going to engage in some fairly scandalous use of the nation's top cop. First, you have to remember this is what they promised they would. As part of the campaign, the Biden-Harris campaign vowed that they would direct their AG to do certain things, and they enumerated at least three, and one of them was to help out plaintiffs suing others in the name of climate. These are cases that it gets pointy-headed, but one of the more pointy-headed aspects is going before the Supreme Court 2 weeks from tomorrow as we speak, actually, and that is whether these things proceed in state court or federal court. In federal court, when you point out all these confessions that this is a way to get federal policy that has eluded them because you can't get Americans to agree to do this to themselves, to this kind of gesture, essentially shutting down the economy. As Ivo de Boer, who's involved in this industry, this climate industry, said, you have to shut down the economy globally to get to your temperature degree objective. So
Amazing. People
don't want to do this to themselves for what really would be an objective and leave them less resilient, less free, and less able to deal with what we're always going to have to deal with, which is often severe, always unpredictable weather. You're just making a lot more Bangladesh, a lot less Florida. So they fail through the democratic process. So they're trying to use the courts. Biden-Harris promised to use their DOJ to turn the tide for this litigation epidemic, which, as I noted, is when it gets to federal court, getting tossed out. What they've learned is they'd better find a way to say this is a state matter. That's the key that's before the Supreme Court this month, and we'll see what happens. The Trump administration has time now, 2 days before the inauguration, or the day before, to argue. The court, for whatever reason, chose to schedule this one really quickly, right before the inauguration. So the Trump Solicitor General will argue this. But what we've learned is this is how Biden-Harris wants to use DOJ, that they will direct their Attorney General to put his or her thumb or thumbs on the scales of justice to help out this climate litigation industry you and I have discussed for so long since we first learned about it. And I recall a particular time when we spoke more often when this was being discussed specifically. Sheldon Whitehouse, this obsessive senator from Rhode Island, who's on the Judiciary Committee, who's so obsessive and a nasty piece of work that he was just passed over for the gavel in the event that the Georgia elections go in the Democrats favor. He will not be chairman, but he will remain obsessive. He had a colloquy with the then Attorney General for Obama-Biden named Loretta Lynch, and you can watch it on C-SPAN. And you'll see the link to that. It's just a short colloquy whereby he ensures that she has, in fact, gotten the FBI involved in looking into using RICO, the anti-mobster law, against the skeptics who keep standing in the way. And obviously that meant groups like CEI. I was there for 20 years, and during that 20-year period, we got a subpoena for records going back the entirety of that time.
Mm-hmm.
10 years of pretty much everything going back 20 years. There's a massive intimidation, bullying, and I suggest an ethical, highly unseemly use of law enforcement to shut down opposition to a very damaging anti-liberty, anti-economic growth, anti-human health and environment agenda in the name of gently ministering to the climate. And
well, and you've pointed out, and not even doing anything really to the climate, and really creating this transfer culture where China and India are allowed to continue producing their emissions because they're considered developing nations, ? And we shut down the American economy because we feel bad because, we've been so prosperous. I guess we feel like we're being impolite or something globally, Chris. Chris Horner on with us, and the pieces in the Washington Times this morning we're talking about here where they weaponize the DOJ against, the skeptics. When we come back, I want to, and it's certainly my role. I always play the hyperbole game, to try to get people's attention and shake them out of their fugue. But, when you watch the riots over the last year over, the black community feeling like they're being targeted by law enforcement, I can't, shake the idea that we're really missing an instance where law enforcement is being targeted against people specifically because you're not on our team. Can we hang on and poke around that a little bit and talk about the realities of this climate agenda?
Absolutely. And a little more about who's behind it that we've learned.
Yeah, and it was you're still with Government Accountability and Oversight, correct?
Correct.
It's govoversight.org is where you find his work. Chris Horner, Government Accountability and Oversight, and has been chronicling this climate agenda for years, and certainly they found the one, we don't want dirty air, and we want clean water, Chris. But when you weaponize law enforcement and you use it to target your political opponents, and this isn't even fanciful. They did this with the IRS in 2009. I mean, this isn't even like you're hypothesizing. That's a dangerous world. How do they get away with it? How do they dress it up in a way that make people think, they're just nice folks and they're trying to help people?
Well, first, make sure your movement is well. You've got your roots everywhere. Some might say tentacles. 2 points that you ought to consider in deciding whether or not this is a serious threat. Remember, Biden-Harris vowed to, with really troubling specificity, to politically direct their attorney general to do various things, several of which included doing that which should be performed through the democratic process, if you can do it through the democratic process, or even if you can't, by having the Department of Justice take over and make it policy through consent decrees and so on. This is also going to be done through using privately placed lawyers. Have you heard about what happened in Philadelphia with election staffers? Rich people placing private staff in offices that they think need, how do I put this, help.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
you're talking about the Center for Technology and Civic Life, right?
Right. Zuckerberg's there, Bloomberg and Hewlett's with these attorneys. And we also know that this scheme, which has been built for years, came together, as you and I have discussed, at a meeting in La Jolla in 2011, where they called for a single sympathetic attorney general. Well, this year, I learned in some documents obtained from the from the University of Oregon Law School, which happened to be on the correspondence, that the California office of the attorney general named Kamala Harris helped organize that meeting. It wasn't a newbie. It wasn't an intern. It was an 18-year veteran, head of her global warming, it was global warming then, initiatives. That's how long this has been going on. It was global warming. And her head of global warming initiatives was there forming this meeting that has not been out before except we published it. And, of course, we know lawyers privately placed in progressive AG offices provided by a climate activist and major party donor named Michael Bloomberg were immediately tasked with advancing this agenda through progressive state AG offices. So that's one way they get away with it. As we've learned, what are you going to do? I'm the Attorney General.
Yeah.
This is clearly against the law in 3 states, Virginia, New York, and Oregon, who did it. All 3 of them just said, well, I disagree. And so we're in court in New York, we're in court in Oregon, we're in court still in the Horner versus Herring case. Our first argument in that case was 2 years ago this month.
Man.
And we're still not anywhere except we have a second suit now because we've learned there was a cache of documents that they didn't admit to. So what happens is if you're the who will guard the guardian, that seems to be the way they get away with it. The Department of Justice, as has been proved now in the past 4 years, can get away with an awful lot because it's the Department of Justice, because of an extension, a very unhealthy extension of this idea of deference. Well, they're law enforcement. Well, they knew things. Well, they're civil servants. They're only doing the best. And they're automatons. They're not actual human beings with actual biases and they're not sinners. They're not among us.
No,
they just operate according to the letter of the law, which we know is not true. So we have legislative oversight. Well, they're typically not that interested in this. And in the event things go differently in Georgia, there will be no interest in it whatsoever.
Well, you bring it to why I think it's so existentially important, whether you love David Perdue or Kelly Loeffler. You know, this firewall needs to be there, and you may say, well, Mitt Romney, well, Ben Sasse. It doesn't matter. You know, we're not going to be heard by Reverend Warnock. Reverend Warnock's going to say, yes, let's punish the sinners of this climate agenda, and let's approve the Attorney General to go to this. So, Chris, to me, the issue winds up being, as you chronicle it there, first and foremost, I think everyone needs to make sure you go to govoversight.org and help, make sure that these folks continue to have all the funding that they need for and to continue the efforts that they make, in this case and to continue to do this. But Chris, one of the things that I really wonder is, what does the regular person do? What does a radio station that owns like 10 radio stations in Virginia? What if they come after us? We don't have the lawyers and we don't have the legal ability. It's the same issue that I connected it to the black community. If you pull a black kid in from the poor part of Charlottesville and charge him with 15 different crimes, he's lucky if he can find a court-appointed attorney that will help him. And if, as you said, it's gone on 2 years. That's beyond the reach of most people's ability to pay a lawyer to defend them. So
one of the reasons I and some colleagues created Government Accountability and Oversight, PC, it's a nonprofit public interest law firm, is I had this talk while I was with CEI with every center-right think tank and every law firm and folks like Judge and AG Meese, who he would convene lawyers in the conservative movement, and I would say, those of your participants who are with big firms, who have these big pro bono obligations and programs, and I had been with a big firm in D.C. where I knew we would bring on Mondays if we had a pro bono idea. Mm-hmm. That's how the firm dedicates, the equivalent of an attorney a year to pro bono services. You need to tap these firms. And we need to continue doing a better job of convincing these firms that, you're going to get media. You're going to get media because the press is on to make sure all the pro bono work goes for a certain side, and that is essentially the statists, and not to defend individuals targeted by the massive resources of the government. So there are public interest law firms. There's Judicial Watch. There's us. There's Southeastern Legal. There's Pacific Legal Foundation. Mountain States, there are numerous. There are firms that have pro bono obligations. It looks like we're going to have to get together and find a way to defend ourselves and the rest who are targeted, because this seems inevitable. Harris and Biden both promised it. Then there was this clumsily synchronized backpedaling on CNN saying, "Oh, we would never do that," thing there over on our website that we promised with much more vigor. Yeah. We would do, and our party has a history of doing, and our donor base demands we do. You bet your sweet boots they're going to do it. And the first thing we need to do is make sure. Now, Virginia doesn't have anyone on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate who's going to do anything useful, but you can try through any of your networks to make sure somebody you know does. This AG confirmation hearing has to end with the nominee having, in no uncertain terms, condemned and disavowed the idea of being politically directed or getting itself involved in what is obviously a shakedown and what is obviously a way to circumvent the democratic process because their ideas have not prevailed.
When you talk about the use of these branches of law enforcement, and in some cases it's just the idea that we've told the reporter it's legal and they nod their head and they walk away. In some cases, it actually is, because in the middle of the night, these smaller bodies, these, in some cases, not even elected bodies, these appointed bodies under, whether it be a state general assembly or a local general assembly, are setting aside these codes that create the legality, in which case, even if you fight back against some of these redistributional plans wrapped up in climate fleece, you have no legal leg to stand on, because somewhere in the middle of the night in a very boring Board of Supervisors or General Assembly subcommittee hearing, this became actual law.
Right. So you're going to need, in this case, legislative oversight in D.C. if, in fact, the United States Attorney General does what Kamala Harris's band called for, which was expressly for a single sympathetic Attorney General. That was their quote, to begin going after private parties to help get the tort firm to bring everyone to their knees. We have very few tools at our disposal. The state owes you, among the few things it does owe you, it owes you protection from this. Right now, and it could be much worse on Wednesday, right now you have very few vehicles, if you can get their attention, for the state to defend you, one of which is Senate oversight. In Virginia, obviously, there are very few interested in keeping the Attorney General in check. However, not once but twice, the legislature passed another funding restriction, which I will translate it English to English. This is already illegal. It's now more illegal. Don't do it. Don't bring on Bloomberg's mercenaries to do Bloomberg's bidding here.
Right.
So, that's all we could do, and it worked, even with this new majority in Virginia. So there's always hope, but you have to make a pain of yourself in making the point that people are abusing public office, and even though they're people you like, it won't always be people you like. And so something's wrong if it's wrong. Something's wrong if it's being done to people you don't like. If it would be wrong if they were doing it to people you do like. Now there's some loopholes in there, but the fact is, this was in the case of the AG taking on a Bloomberg mercenary. That was against the law. It was against his own policy, and nobody seemed to care because he was the AG. And now nobody wants to defend it. So we had a success here in Virginia, raising the question, what's wrong with everybody else? And now it looks like it's moving to Washington.
Well, but they need, and we need to be, insistent, persistent, and consistent, to channel my inner Jesse Jackson for a moment, Chris, because, it is a long game, and they are well-funded. You mentioned Bloomberg's mercenaries. They're out there, and Zuckerberg was $350 billion to the Center for Technology and Civic Life to, give more money to the Philadelphia Board of Elections than Philadelphia did. The government is frittering away money in programs, and then they have nothing left for the election, and they turn their pockets out and say, gee, wouldn't this be creative if we could do this with other monies, Chris? So, again, give us a chronicle of what we need to watch next. Obviously, help out, whatever you can do in Georgia, but, we're also looking at Virginia's elections in 2021, correct?
That's true. There is, for example, an effort underway. Virginia has expressed interest in documents we obtained in bringing on a privately funded environment official through the governor's office or one of the two departments. I can't remember. And it was funded by the Hewlett Foundation, which is sort of taken over while Bloomberg was running for president. They're staffing up government with private activists, privately financed activists, who are there for a reason. And they're there to push the envelope of the law, or just as we've done in Virginia, just declare law because the legislature won't comply. All you can do is, the first and foremost thing is, until they've targeted you specifically, get yourself some elected representatives who will defend you through the oversight process. Unfortunately, that oversight process likely will go nowhere if that individual's party is not in the majority. So elect a majority that you like. Second is, if you get targeted, speak to these public interest law firms and the local ones in town. They will give the most unseemly, destructive, radical parties or parties representing the most destructive ideas lots of pro bono time because of the PR effect. And they are shouted down if they give what we would consider right-thinking people pro bono representation. And you're just going to have to tell them, maybe a smaller firm that still has pro bono obligations, look, we need a fighter. We need somebody who's not afraid of maybe get a law firm that doesn't have a marketing department and say, look, I'm looking for lawyers.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris Horner. GovOversight.org is where you find his work. Look up columns, both this one and the one from the last week at the Washington Times. For you, thank you for all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Find us online at virginiainstitute.org, our YouTube channel for archives. Until next week, I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.